Hey everyone, Dr. Harmon here. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about Ivo Pitanguy today, and all this information comes from the same source, and that book is entitled Plastic Surgery Obsession, Brazil's Dr. Ivo Pitanguy Triggered It All. So I told you I was going to talk more about his personality and some interesting stories about his life, and I will today. He was known to be a workhorse. He had an unbelievable work ethic. He'd routinely operate for 12 hours a day and then go off to a black tie event at night. He was ambidextrous, and so he could operate equally well with his right and left hand. And he had an amazing team behind him who allowed him to become an even higher volume surgeon. And to the point about him going to black tie events after surgery, he actually was ensconced in high society in Brazil. His wife, Mary Lou, was a member of that society since childhood. She was very social as well. And so that was partly how he became well known all over the world. He was well known in high society in Rio, and jet setters would come in from all over the world to Rio and then be introduced to him. And as a result, he treated many politicians and wives of politicians, and he treated many movie stars as well. His clients included Brigitte Bardot, Frank Sinatra. He actually treated the burn injuries on Michael Jackson's scalp after he burned his scalp filming a Pepsi commercial in the 1980s. He treated Jackie O and Rosalind Carter, and he treated Queen Faridibra of Iran in the 1970s. And there's an interesting story about that experience, and this all comes from the book. So he went to Tehran, and they wanted him to operate in the palace, but he had preferred the hospital. So they actually cleared a whole floor of the hospital out for him to operate. And when he was operating, he ran into some complications and was looking for a specific instrument. And he did speak Farsi, and all of his staff there spoke Farsi only. And fortunately, he spoke 6 languages fluently, so he would list that instrument off in every language he knew. And apparently, the Portuguese word for that instrument was very similar to the Farsi word for the instrument. And so someone recognized the word, gave him the correct instrument, and everything went well. As a member of high society, he was an avid fan of the arts. He actually had his home in Rio designed by the famous modernist architect Sergio Bernardes, who, if you have a chance to look up, is absolutely amazing. He did amazing work during his career. I'm a big fan of architecture, and so it was really interesting to see that. He also was very open with the press, and it's important to know at this time that in Brazil, unlike the United States and Europe, plastic surgeons were actively involved in the press, actively involved in social life and talking about their work, and it was not looked down upon to do so. So this is a very different world at that time compared to the United States and Europe. In 1967, the Time magazine article was published about him that made him famous all over the world. And in 1971, he had a patient actually publish a book about her experience undergoing surgery with him called The Beautiful People's Beauty Book. And it was one of the first opportunities people had to learn about what it's like to undergo plastic surgery and to recover from plastic surgery. The United States press came to him as well. The New York Times in 1980 did an article about him. And instead of focusing on his work and his accomplishments, they mostly focused on his lifestyle. He lived in a beautiful modernist home in a wealthy neighborhood of Rio. He also owned a private island off the coast of Rio. Many of his patients would go there and stay before and after surgery. And so that was actually the focus of the article, rather than what he had accomplished as a surgeon. He was and did earn the respect of surgeons all over the world. And he was invited to Europe and many countries to operate. But what would happen is he was so talented, he'd become so popular, all the other plastic surgeons would become jealous and then revoke his privileges. And so he'd move to a different country, be invited to a different country, and the same thing would happen. So the thing that I learned from his life was, one, that we need to encourage the development of plastic surgeons all over the world, because you never know where the next talent who contributes to the medical literature and techniques to the world could come from. And I think that society in Brazil at the time was much more forward thinking about how a surgeon engages with his patients and with the world. And we're, I think, starting to be more like that, but it was very unique and unusual at the time. And I also wanted to add a little interesting story about him, or a couple of interesting stories. The first is the individual who wrote the song The Girl from Ipanema, whose name is Vinicius de Moraes, actually was inspired to coin a new Portuguese verb, and that verb was pitanguizar, which when translated is to create beauty. And the second thing I wanted to talk about him is that he was a revered member of society in Brazil, and he was so revered that he was actually the last person to carry the Olympic torch in 2016 during the Rio Olympics, shortly before his death at the age of 93.